Hello and welcome to another ship review. Today we will talk about Slasher. This is Minmatar Take One Attack Frigate. Slasher is quite a difficult ship to fly, but at the same time you can extract quite a lot of performance out of it. I never really enjoyed flying it, but I have to say that in the current meta and in general since 2022, Slasher makes a lot of sense if you want to use cheap Tech 1 frigate that still has decent engagement profile. We will talk a bit later about what makes this ship so good in the current meta. So in terms of stats, it was quite surprising to me to see that Slasher is actually quite popular. You can see the number of engagements is above Incursus, for example, and usually people like to fly straightforward ships like Incursus. It's a lot more than Slashers. And it's even more popular than a Breacher, which is probably top Tech 1 frigate currently. Okay, so you have 442 slot layout, which means you can fit quite a lot of control. In general, Slasher is the Tech 1 frigate with the highest speed and the highest control and with the lowest tank. So it's difficult to fly because you almost always rely on your control and mitigation to win fights and not on raw numbers of tank and DPS. The feats generally depend on whether you use autocannons or artillery. If you use autocannons, you will generally fly brawling archetypes and you will use your utility high slot for Newt, and you may or may not use your medium, one of your free medium slots for Track and Disruption. And when the idea is you try to mitigate at close range with signature tanking. If you use artillery, when you fly either web kiters or pure kiters, and when you try to mitigate with your speed and distance. Again, artillery feats quite often use Track and Disruptor in medium slots as well. So when you look at the performance map, you see one interesting feature, and the interesting feature is that Slasher has very good win rates against destroyers. You can see that Slasher actually has higher win rates against Navy destroyers than against Navy frigates. And this is because Slasher can play this superior control game much better against destroyers than against Navy frigates. As a general rule, if you fight against Navy frigates, you very often face two webs, and two webs essentially shut down close range archetypes. So you can't really play as a brawler against a frigate that has two webs, because you will not be able to mitigate. And if you can't mitigate, it comes down to tank and DPS, and tank and DPS on Slasher is not competitive. And this is also the reason why in the current meta, Slasher is a pretty decent choice, because you can fight a lot of destroyers. Even if you go with close range feats, like with autocannons, but especially if you go with long range feats, like kiting feats, web kiting feats with artillery. Okay, now let's look at feats, because Slasher is quite flexible frigate and it has a bunch of interesting feats and variations. Okay, so I will start with brawling feats, and then we will talk about web kiting and kiting feats. So for brawling feats, you have a choice between going with a newt and shield tank, or going with armor tank and tracking disruptor. As usual, both feats have advantages and disadvantages. This is the feat with a newt and medium auxiliary shield booster. The main advantage is that it's quite strong against cap-dependent frigates, because you can stay at close range and shut down the DPS and control quite quickly, because you can practically perma-run your newt. The downside is that you don't have any permanent tank, so you have to either get a kill or clear all of the DPS before you commit to the ship. For example, you will need to clear all of the drones. You should use, by the way, yes, you should use ancillary shield boost and non-medium shield extender, because medium shield extender increases your sig radius, and for slasher it's crucial to stay as small as possible. Your signature. The alternative brawling feat is with a tracking disruptor and armor rep. The advantage is that here you have kind of a permanent tank. You can run your armor tank constantly if you can apply NOS. The downside, of course, is that you fully rely on mitigation from your tracking disruption. You usually use tracking disruption on tracking speed and not on optimal range. And if your mitigation doesn't work, or if you misclick somewhere, you will die very fast, because the tank is very unreliable. So this feat is a bit better against ships with poor tracking, and this feat is a bit better against ships with good tracking and with high cap dependency. So for example, against blaster frigates, you probably want to go with a newt and a bit higher burst tank. And against like ships with railguns, you probably want to go with this one. Okay. I have to say that you can also fit an anti-kiting feat on a slasher, and it's probably the best anti-kiter among all Tick-1 frigates. You will, or at least you used to see anti-kiting slashers in home defense fleet in nullsec literally all the time. These like throwaway Tick-1 tacklers, extremely dangerous for any kiter, because slasher is just so fast. It can fit dual probes, so it's relatively difficult to clear actually. But in action warfare, I wouldn't say it's that useful. Again, because when you show a kiter that you are in an anti-kiting slasher, your opponent will likely just warp out immediately, because fighting against anti-kiting slasher in a kiter is quite risky. Especially when you consider how cheap a slasher is. Okay, now let's say that you feed artillery, and in this case you have a choice between web kiting and kiting. It's both make a lot of sense. I would say web kiting feed is a bit better against frigates, and kiting feat is a bit better against destroyers, because it gives you more flexibility in the range. But the idea is essentially the same. With web kiting feat, you stay around 13 kilometers, And when you use your small SIG with an afterburner and your tracking disruptor to mitigate the incoming damage, and then you just try to outlast your opponent. Of course, your DPS is very poor, so essentially you bet on the complete mitigation, which may not be possible if your opponent has a web himself. But you can quite easily leave most of the fights, since you will be outside of a scrum range anyway, or at the very edge of scrum range. So if the fight does not go your way, you generally can just pick a warpable object behind you and just click a line and then warp out. And then the pure kiting feat, this one is quite popular as well. The idea here is that you essentially fly just a pure kiter. Think of, I don't know, Condor, for example. And medium slots, by the way, are exactly, almost exactly the same. You just have a smaller tank here. When you mitigate all the damage with a tracking disruption, and you kind of hope that eventually you will win the DPS race. And because this ship is so fast and so small, it's quite difficult to hit it. Even for ships with small weapons like destroyers, for example. And since here you don't have to commit to web range, you also kind of increase your ability to mitigate against targets that have multiple webs. Now the problem here, of course, is the application against afterburning frigates. When you fly this one, it's much easier to apply against frigates with afterburner, because your transversals generally will be a bit lower and you will have a web. And here you will be running around them like crazy. You have a pretty poor tracking on your artillery. So this one is a bit better against larger targets like destroyers. Against frigates you may struggle quite a lot with application, and it will require good piloting as well. Overall, I tried flying Slasher a little bit. It has a lot of potential. It's very engageable. Everyone will be happy to fight you, regardless of whether you're in position or not, or out of position. So you get a lot of fights, and your engagement profile is quite good. You can fight destroyers, navy destroyers, Tick-1 destroyers, and in a kiting feats, you can also fight many frigates, especially if you're in position. But it's a very difficult ship to fly. It's very punishing. When you make a single mistake, you generally immediately die, because your tank especially is extremely poor, and you fully rely on mitigation. So it's difficult. But this ship has a lot of potential. So as I said, if you wanna fly cheap Tick-1 frigate with decent engagement profile, Slasher is something that you can consider. Okay, thank you for watching. See you in the next ship reviews.